What's going on, everybody? Welcome to episode 5 of Unraveled Influence podcast. My guest today was part of my open mic this past Friday. Obviously, when you hear this podcast, it'll be way past already. But the point is, Matthew Marroquín, how are you? Am I pronouncing your last name correctly?
It's Marroquín for the last name. Matthew Marroquín.
Marroquín. Okay, got you. So, how are you feeling? How are you?
I'm doing pretty well today. Just been really busy this last week, 2 weeks even. So, yeah, just trying to keep up.
Nah, no doubt, no doubt. So once everybody hears this episode, we already have done the open mic. I guess I'll start with this. How do you feel? What was your experience like at the open mic that we did in Bayonne, New Jersey?
It was interesting. It definitely was like a bringing back to the roots of going to some small bar, doing an open mic with, just some local poets and some not so local poets who are in the area. And it's just like, oh yeah, this is fun. This is interesting. A good friend of mine, shout out to Robert, like asked me, and then he, I know he told you to ask me to come and feature. So I thought, okay, why not? Seems like cool people. Let me just stop on by and do my little thing. So it was really cool to like come back to that, because prior to that I was already I think the day before I was like at Patterson Poetry Festival performing for like a bunch of school students. So it's like going from like performing from like 100 school kids to like just a small little bar where the dude at the pool table told me that's a great poem after, and he wasn't even a poet. So that was like, this is a different energy, but I love it.
Word. And that was our first one, too, ever. So it was like, to
Hmm.
me, that was better than what I thought it was going to be. Because there was some fearful things that I was worried about, but it came out way better than what I expected. And to have you a part of that, man, because, again, the video will be up soon. But definitely, it was such an amazing night. It was definitely, I feel like a stepping stone for Unraveled Influence. And you got to be a part of that. And that was an honor and a privilege. And yes, shout out to Mr. Robert Kazi, who couldn't make it because, he was a little sick. I don't want to talk too much about it, but I will say that if it wasn't for him, I would have never met you. So Matthew, thank you. So I'm gonna start. Well, I don't want to start, but so my next question to you is, how did poetry begin for you?
So I can't say I always liked writing and reading. I actually was really bad at it growing up
Hmm.
when I was younger. Uh, Turns out I have like dyslexia. Uh,
Wow.
that would have been like probably helpful to know. Uh, so that's the main part of it. But when I got to around seventh grade, I just started reading a lot of books. Eighth grade is like when I said, "Hey, mom, I want to be a writer, like a novelist or something." My mom said that's not a real job. So I was like, well, I want to do it anyways. And I tried to write a book.
Wow.
Yeah, I did. The book did not make it very far. I read some of those papers. I saved them. Um,
Wow. But you
in
know
like,
what? But my whole thing is, hey, but you know what? You didn't just listen. You say, no, I'm going to do it anyway. And I mean, that's something to be encouraged about, because you look back now like, hey, even if it didn't go well, but my whole thing is, but at least I could say I did it. I pushed myself
yeah,
beyond my comfort zone. So that's an awesome thing.
yeah, definitely different. Freshman year is when I finally got introduced to like what a poem is, but it was like the very, very basics. Like maybe we talked about it for a week in my class. But other than that, we had a lot of time for free creative writing, which I loved because we could create and write on the weekly. It was something my teacher implemented that we all kind of liked, and we could go up there if we wanted to and read it. Great. I loved doing that. I like writing my little stories and saying the things, and it just turned out I wrote with a lot of metaphors. Not really sure why. I just always used a lot of analogies because it just made sense from my head. So sophomore year of college came. My sister had to go early to college, like a week before orientation, or not orientation, before move in for everybody else because of her scholarship. So my mom and I and my older sister all went to the college. And there was a poet there. They hired a poet to perform. It was like a first generation program, I think. And he's actually like, well, I think he's just getting out of it, but he's gonna be he was the poet laureate of Dallas, Texas. So I'm like, wow, okay, cool. That's what he is now. But at the time, he was just, a poet and professor. I saw him perform a poem. He told us this is what he does for work. He's a professor during the day, and on the weekends or when he can, he gets hired out to go do poetry professionally. I saw him perform, and the crowd went wild for his
Wow.
first piece. I look back at my mom. I'm like, that's what I want to do. Like, that's it.
Wow.
The writing life plus the performance aspect of it. That's everything right there.
Wow.
And that's how I started. Like, I went to his workshop after. I spit a poem there. I'd say that's like my first true poem. I would say is like from that workshop, because that was the first time I went into it thinking this is a poem and I want to write it.
Wow.
This is it. And I did it. I spit it. Everyone was going crazy in the crowd too. And I was like, this is everything. This is everything. And from there, I just started doing it at like talent shows. And there was no real poetry venues around me, like at all. I was living in Iowa, like Storm Lake, Iowa, in the middle of a cornfield. There's the nearest poetry slam, let's say, or open mic was 2.5 hours away.
Oh, wow.
So I just had to do with what I had, which was, these conventions I went to where I could go to a talent show or these local things or speech which had a poetry category in it, things like that. And that was the only like way I could even slip my poetry into an audience. And it wasn't until I'd say the pandemic hit where I really started taking off with poetry. I started attending the New Eureka Poets Cafe virtual,
Okay.
and that's when I saw poets from all around the world performing on this platform, and it really expanded my brain to what poetry could do. From there, I started writing and writing and writing, and then the year after, I started getting my first few paid gigs, my first few like professional entryway
Wow.
to it. I think my first one was some virtual event. I got paid like $50, I think.
Hey, but that's awesome.
Yeah, I spit like one poem though, so I'm like $50 for like a 3-minute poem. Yeah, and I started doing more slams online and things like that, and I was just more connected because the poetry community was right there. I ended up writing a book. Publisher found me through the online scene. I published that book. I did like a little East Coast poetry tour and everything. And then I just started expanding and decided to move out to the East Coast because that's where I realized this is where a lot of the poets who I know and respect and love are at.
Wow.
So I came out.
Wow, that is awesome. So walk me through your creative process, because I was just trying to listen to everything you're saying. It was so good. So I want to capture every little thing possible. So I'm gonna dissect your brain a little bit, but talk to me about your creative process, right? Because that is very interesting. How does that look like for you when you're creating like when you wrote your? All right, so I'll start with this. When you tell me about when you wrote your first poem. Walk me through that creative process exactly. And because you did say that you wrote things in metaphors and stuff like that. Was it just something because it just happened naturally? Okay, it's a metaphoric thing, and then I was like, oh snap, okay, I realized I opened that way. Or was it something more that it was just like walk me through that? I'm very curious to know.
So I'm not sure if it's like the neurodivergent brain or what, but like I take things both very literally, but things also don't make sense for my brain very easily. So when I'm going through situations, when I'm going through things I don't understand, I try to relate it to something I do understand. So when I was writing, it just kind of came out naturally in metaphors and analogies. Just naturally came out in analogies like, oh, this is like this and this is like this, good simile, or this is just like that. Like that's how it works. The first poem I say, I was given a prompt, just like a starting sentence. It was actually the Red Wheelbarrow poem was the first one. Like so much depends upon, like, and then it goes into the poem. But we were told like we could write whatever. Don't worry about the poem or the format or anything. Just start off with so much depends upon. And I just started going off of it. Like so much depends upon this is that, this is that, this, and just started explaining life, like my life, like how much, because I was there for a first generation contest too. So I was like, I started talking about the first generation experience. You know, like it wasn't conference. Sorry, it was like my sister's like scholarship conference. I guess it was like a pre-conference thing for my sister, but I got to attend the things too, so it was cool. Um, yeah, that's where a lot of it came in. And but now my creation process is a little bit different, I'd say.
Okay.
I'm a little bit more whenever I think of something where I'm like, oh, that's a line. I say something, that's a line. I'll write it down. If I hear something on the street, read something in the book, hear some other poet spit it, and I think that's a great line, I'll write it down. I
Wow.
usually
Okay.
I usually put where I heard it if I can. If I thought of it myself, I just like keep it there and let it exist. Um, and then it's just there. It's great. It's cool. So when I'm trying to write a poem, sometimes it comes to me. It's just like, oh, I'm just gonna start writing. I start
Okay.
writing, and it just flows out. Other times it's like, I have no clue what I want to write. I don't even know if I want to write right now, so I just don't write. Uh, I don't write all the time. Like it doesn't. I don't always have to be writing. I don't always have to be creating.
Right. Right.
Sometimes I do force myself to, and just for practice and exercise of like, okay, I'm gonna go into my notes app and try to write based off one of the poems. Especially if I'm a creative mood, I want to write mood, but I don't know what to write. So I look through all my notes apps and like or my Google Docs or whatever and just start editing things I've already done or creating new poems. And a lot of times it's a lot of these little lines I picked up over time. I just start mashing them together and rewriting them. So I'm like, oh,
Wow.
I love that line. The actual reason I love that line is because of this part of it, like what they're trying to say with it. So I really want to say this, but I loved how
Mm.
this poet said this line. So I say it in my own way, but I'm using it usually in a whole different type of poem. And then I just go from there. And I used to write for the stage more so. I majored in theater. Theatrics is like a whole thing for me. But now I'm to the point where I'm writing for myself and what I think needs to be said.
Wow.
And if it ends up being worthy for the stage, it ends up being worthy for the stage. There's a lot of things going on in the world where I'm just like, oh, I don't want to share this yet because it's not ready for the world yet. Like it's not for me.
Okay, so you're more like a timely type poet, basically, right? Like you're the kind of poet that if it's not the time yet, then I'll wait till the right moment and the right situation presents itself where I could write that piece, read that piece, and present that piece. And that's very interesting. So because I know you were talking about freestyling, you was talking about writing things down. So does it come out like a freestyle-ish and then you write it, or I know you say you get your notepad, you just start writing, but like let's say if you're walking down the street, do you like stop, okay, and then just take your notepad, start writing, or is it just something you're walking around and all of a sudden something happens? Like, oh snap! Wait, I gotta write this down before I forget. Like, is it that kind of a situation?
Both. So definitely like where I say a line and I'm like, wait, that was a bar, like, or that was a line. That was great. So then I like notes that, write it down. Sometimes I'm just like thinking. I'm like, huh, let me just write this down really quick. What's up my thoughts? But usually, yeah, I'm just like existing daily life and something I hear, something happens, or I have a thought, or I see something that reminds me of something else. Because again,
Right,
everything for
right.
me is like everything relates to something else in my life. And the ADHD kind of helps with that because I think of one thing, but then I think of like five different steps ahead.
Okay.
Because you mentioned pigs, let's say. Let's say you mentioned you like to eat bacon, like a bacon, egg, and cheese, New
Right.
Yorker, right? We like to eat bacon, egg, and cheese. Okay, I start thinking of bacon. Bacon comes from plants. Plants, the pigs. Pigs are in Iowa. Iowa has a lot of plants, pork plants, pork plants. My dad worked at a pork plant. Tyson pork plant overworked him, and then I just start going
Wow. Okay.
you know, into like, okay, let's talk about how conglomerates and corporations are evil, overworking on the immigrant populations that have come to the U.S. and abuse them in a sense. And then I go
Wow.
on into that, all based off of like I just hear something about bacon, and my brain will
Wow.
go there. Like it just happens.
No, I love that. No, no, cause I have ADHD myself as well, and I also have schizotypal personality disorder. So like everything you're saying, I get it, cause I'm kind of the same way too. So I wanted to ask you, in your opinion, what do you think is the major difference between, let's say, a performance rather than doing a piece, right? Because from even when I met you and the stuff I've seen on the online with stuff you've done, you don't. It seems like you just perform it now. Do you have like a routine of how you memorize the piece? Like, is it something like you read the piece first? I mean, let's say you have a piece you wrote already. Is it something like you write the piece, you look at it, you memorize it, and then perform it by yourself before you perform it outside? Like, how does that look like for you as far as the performance aspect of it?
It's a little bit different for everybody. I know some poets who can memorize a piece in a day. Very, very rare. But I do know poets who've done that. I'm the type of poet, though. Again, my memory is not great. Like, also part of the neurodivergent brain, you know? Memory is not great. It's not always there. So when I'm starting to memorize a piece, usually I use open mics, small open mics. I'm going to support my friends doing this, you know, these free little gigs, or not even gigs, they're free little like open mics that are existent that I go to. I usually use them to workshop pieces. It's like great.
Okay.
I love it, especially when like it's in New York City, some random little cafe, and they're having a little open mic, and I can just like no one really knows me, or maybe I know a couple people. Or even if it's like, oh yeah, I know everyone here, they all know my performance pieces. Let me go try something new. So then I can go up there with my phone and read it off my phone and practice a piece that I wrote. And while I'm performing, I notice that I'll sometimes say words differently or say lines differently. And sometimes I like it more, or sometimes it just
Right.
flows out more naturally. So then when I sit down, I immediately go into editing and edit it so that way it flows naturally. And I create like a performance version of it. Um,
Wow. Okay.
so, and then from there, once I think, okay, this poem's ready, sometimes I'll like run it through, you know, my roommate's a poet, so I'll run it through him, or I'll run it through other poets really quick sometimes. Just to like, hey, there's a part that I'm not ready with. I don't know how to like fix it up. Other times I'm like, no, this is ready. Let's go for it. And I just start memorizing it. So I break
Hmm.
it up piece by piece, line by line, and try to remember each piece individually. Um, Especially after this point, I've probably already done it at like 3 or 4 open mics maybe, or maybe I've like read it out loud to myself at least 3 or 4 times, so I kind of know the flow and what it's saying.
Okay.
Now it's just memorizing it, so I have it up somewhere, but then I read it or try to do it from memory while I'm doing dishes, while I'm
Wow.
cooking,
Okay.
while I'm in the shower, while I'm driving. I'll do any of those things. One of the main ways I try to memorize at first is recording it, just like my voice, and I'll listen back to it. Great, I gotta go to a performance in Brooklyn tomorrow. Actually, true. Um, so I will record it, put it on loop, and listen to it for the whole hour. Maybe not the whole hour, but you know, I'll listen to it for like
Mm.
20 minutes. It's a 3-minute piece, so I listen to it like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times, however many times I want to, depending on how much time I want to spend
Right.
hearing my
Right.
own voice and my own piece. But then I'll try to like talk with it. First times I'll just listen, and then I'll try to like talk with it, see if I can follow it, and then from there I can go into the let me do it while I'm washing dishes and have it up over here. So if I forget a piece or a part, I can just like look over really quick. Oh, that's that part. Yeah. Da 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 da. Great. And that's how I do it. I'll just like be talking it throughout my own apartment or any free time I get by myself.
Wow. That's a good strategy too. I love that. Wow. Okay. Hold on, cause now I gotta really think, cause I'm so intrigued right now with everything you just said. I was like, wow, it's interesting, cause Robert Kazi said he started doing that too. Like he'll just reread his piece, or he'll like, if I'm not mistaken, I think he said he records himself, or he'll just hear himself saying it until he memorizes it. I tried doing that, but with me, you know what it is. I feel like even when I like if I do episodes, and then I'll re-listen to the episodes, and I hate the way my voice sounds on a microphone. So I get kind of self-conscious about it. Like that's just me personally. I'm just like, oh god, is this really how I sound? But then I'm like, how does everybody else does it, where they sound like a nice deep voice? And yes, and I'm just like, yo, I can't do that shit. It's just crazy to me to think.
Everybody hates how they sound probably the first few times they listen, first few hundred times you listen. Something that really helped me with this I did like I almost got things memorized even earlier on, like in college stuff. Performing in front of a mirror is also really good, by the way. That's another good
Okay.
performance. You can see your body and how you're moving and see what actions and motions make sense. Again, I
Mm.
study theater, so it was like one of those things where I know a lot of the performance techniques, and I had to memorize things for plays. So this is the type of stuff I do. I took a podcasting class though while I was in college. Actually, a couple of them, like podcasting and all this other stuff, because I did some like a lot of it was theater, but also like digital media and stuff like that. You know, I
Okay.
did a lot of digital media, so I had to watch myself a lot and hear myself when editing a lot and hours worth of it because I was like very particular how I like things done. So I heard hours and hours. After a while, you just get used to your voice. Like
Okay.
you just get over it. Like now, I listen back and I'm like, oh yeah, that sound funny still, but like whatever. Like that's how I sound. I can't change it. It
Right.
exists.
No, so talk to me about the because you mentioned movement, and I thought that was very interesting. So talk to me about the movement when you perform your piece, and you said about the movement. I guess my question to you is, in what way does that help express the piece that you're trying to express? I don't know if that question made sense.
Yeah. So movement how at least how I was taught it in theater. No movement should be a wasted movement. You shouldn't do movements just to move. That there's a
Okay.
lot of people who in acting and even poetry where they're just moving because they think this is what people do and this is what feels right probably. But they don't really I go a little bit more intentional with it. Like why am I moving my hands like this? Why am I pulling out like this? Am I trying to signify something like numbers? Like what 9 times, you know, like something like that. Um, they only like it when their coffee and their yard workers are brown, but not their toys. You know, like why am I making this movement? And how does it enhance the performance? Does there need to be movement there? So the parts where my face is better showing. So maybe I need to tone down the movements with my hands so that way they can
Mm.
focus more on my face. Maybe other times I want my hands to be out there because I'm trying to talk and really bring up the energy, and maybe I'm numbering something and da 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 da. Or maybe I'm like over here talking about directions, talking about landed in the free box, saying I have the same inalienable rights as those toys on the table. So I'm like pointing down because I'm pointing towards the box, imaginary box, obviously, but like box, same as those toys on the table. I'm pretending like I'm in the box now, pointing up towards the table. Like that's just like the flow of it. I'm like, oh, that makes sense. This is how it
Okay.
goes. So it enhances the performance because or how it enhances is just the movement helps portray the image you want the audience to perceive. Whereas
Mm.
words can do that a lot, but people aren't always going to be able to keep up or stay in tune with all the words if you're talking for 3, 4, 5 minutes straight. Attention spans are short. Like you
Right.
got to
Yeah.
do something to keep them interested
Mm.
going. And that comes with not only movement, but fluctuations in the voice, fluctuations within the piece, fluctuations within the emotions and the ranges. I see a lot of really good performers who might go to a poetry slam or something and go really into it deep and really get into it, but then they're stuck there the entire time and they don't switch out of
Okay.
that energy, which is fine. Great piece. Oh my gosh, I loved it. Cool. But people are going to get lost. If not lost, they might not find it interesting after they just heard, let's say it's a slam, a minute and a half worth of that, and you still got a minute left of the same thing. Yeah, you're saying different words, but you gotta like at least I believe this is what I believe. Again, it's all opinion on performance, right?
Right.
Um, that you need to vary the type of performance you do and the type of emotions you portray, the type of facial expressions you use, the type of hand movements you use, so that way it keeps the audience engaged. If you're gonna go straight into that deep, hard part the entire time, that is like the climax of your piece. You should save that deepest, darkest, I'm reaching into my soul for the climax of your piece. This is what you're trying to portray. This is what you're really trying to hit home. Why is the rest of the piece like that? Not every single word is actually as important. Again, some poems, definitely every single word great and important, but how can you make it seem great and important when they all sound the same?
Wow. Okay. Wow. You just gave me a whole lesson right now. So this is fascinating. Thank you
I
for
taught
that.
performance for a very,
Ooh.
not I want to say a very long time, but I taught performance for quite a few years now. So
That is no, dude. One thing I tell all my guests here when you guys come on, you tell me your stuff. I'm always learning, right? I think you should always learn. Like you're a guest on this show, and you're telling me you tell me your life, some of my performances, but like I'm learning so much right now. The importance of movement. Like I guess I didn't think it was that much of a big deal, but you just proved to me no, it is much of a big deal because of the point that you're trying to portray in the performance of the piece that you're trying to perform. And it's like I never really looked at it like that. I'm gonna be honest with you. And then you said how people just move just to move. In your opinion, this is really good. Okay, so in your opinion, what do you think? No, actually, not what do you think, but how can you tell when someone is moving just because they feel like they have to move, and also someone that's just moving, and it's like it's so authentic? Like, what would be a difference if you could get? Like, can you tell a difference between the? If so, how can you tell the difference?
that's opinionated too. For
Okay.
me, I like look at it and think, okay, why did you do that? Like, if you can give me justifiable reasons why you did it, then maybe. But sometimes I just see people with poetry. It's not usually not um hand movements and stuff. Usually is like not as crazy when you see people moving. But one thing I do see often, even with poets who are seasoned, is like a sway. They sway on stage
Okay.
unintentionally. The piece is just very powerful, and because of it, they're almost like rocking. And I'm like, okay, great. I get it.
Mm.
It's powerful. Why are you rocking? Like, that's great. It's raw. It's great if it's a new piece, but this is maybe the sixth time I heard the same piece. Why are you still rocking? Like, what does a rocking do? Is that the best way to portray it, or
Mm.
if you stay still and let people focus on the words now, would that have more meaning into you talking about that subject?
Wow.
You know?
Okay.
But things
Okay.
like that. Something else I also do notice, like vocally, sometimes, like a lot of poets might between when they're really getting into it, they might be saying a really good line and they gotta take a breath, and like it's a very loud and obvious breath. And I've done that plenty. Okay, I have done it plenty. But sometimes it's a distraction when it comes, like, especially I don't like it when I hear it when it's a very powerful part and it keeps on happening in between every other line, but the
Mm.
piece is so good. Like, yo, if you just took out those breaths, like those lines hit, let it all flow. Don't like take a breath.
Right.
Just calm down, take a breath, and really say it. Cause yeah, things being raw can be moving, life
Right.
changing. I love the rawness of new pieces. But when you see someone go out there advocating, talking, I mean, poetry is the especially the performance poetry is the words of the people used for social change and social reform. Like that's really what it came from.
Right.
So if you're out here wanting to share these words in a platform where the people understand, but also the people who minds you're trying to change, aka let's say the government or an organization or corporation, so they also understand, sometimes that power with the calm power with it is going to do a lot more to tell somebody this is how it should be. This is what you're
Mm.
doing wrong. This is what we need. Sometimes
Mm.
that's a little bit more powerful than saying this is what we need. This is what we got to do. And it's
Mm.
just
Okay.
the power of it. Like when I see that and I see this extra emotion, it just makes me feel like this person's not fully in control of their voice and body when
Mm.
it comes to the performance of it. which is okay. It takes time. Sometimes it's like people can't control that. That's okay. It doesn't make the piece worse. But when it comes to an actual performance, let's say, again, this is just for performance, it needs to have some of that. You need to have control of what you're doing.
Okay.
Because now you're doing it professionally. Now you're doing it for a live audience. Now you're doing it for a big slam. Now you're doing it for these people who are going to judge on that maybe, or want to pay you, let's say, especially if it's you want to do professionally, they're going to want to pay you for a professional performance. So if you're doing this performance professionally, make sure you have control of the body, because that's your instrument. You know, you got to learn how to use your instrument to the best of its ability, to what you have and the things you have. Find that thing that makes you you and use it. Because that's all we get. We get this one instrument, this one body, and we got to use it to the utmost ability we can. And if you're not in control of your instrument fully, then you got to take time, step back, and learn how to play that instrument. So that way, you can be that Yo-Yo Ma on stage with that cello, and not be that someone who's still learning.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I'm learning so much. The rocking part, that really got me a little bit, because I can't stand still for the life of me, right? So like if I'm in the same spot for the long time, I start not pacing. I'll rock back and forth or side to side, or I do this thing with my foot. It's, oh my God. So see, like, because I was looking at some of the videos I was editing. So when I there was a part, I forgot which performance it was, but I was standing somewhere and I look at I'm like, oh my God, do I really do that shit? Oh my God. Like, I'm talking to my wife, and my wife's like, babe, can you like not do that because you're making me seasick? I'm sorry, I can't control it. But like, I don't realize I'm doing it until somebody points it out.
Yeah,
So it's
same here. Same here. Trust me, it's not a bad thing. Especially if I'm watching a performance, I literally cannot, unless I'm absolutely captivated, which is very hard for someone with ADHD. Even if I absolutely love the poet, absolutely love the piece, I could still sometimes need to do something else with my hands or my body. I just need to be. That's why I always sit in the back, because I need to be able to like move or walk or get out of there at any point in time. Because like if I'm in front, I will be distracting. I will be distracted, not actually just focus on one thing the entire time.
Oh my God! Thank you, Lord, because you understand. Yeah, and you know what it is? I could never put that into words. You just put into words what I could never explain. So thank you for that. Oh man, wow! Because that's exactly what that is. That's why I sit in the back of the church, or if I'm somewhere, I try to be away from an area that's distracting so people don't see me, right? So if I'm not careful, like I was saying earlier about the camera, I was like, oh God, I gotta make sure I crop that part out, because that's crazy. I was like, oh God, I really was just doing that. Okay. And then somebody had recorded their own version of the thing, for their page, and you see me in the background behind the camera, and I'm just like, oh my God, do I really do that? Oh shit. Like, that's just crazy to me. So the way you broke that down was perfect. That struggle is real, though. Like,
it is. I've spent a lot of time thinking about this. Like,
my God.
I'm a big runner, so when I'm on runs, and I run a lot. Like, I run 40, 50, 60 miles a week.
Okay.
I've been doing it now for like a decade. So because I do it competitively. So on long runs, especially, or just like easy runs where I'm going today, I just went 7. The other days I go, like, let's say long runs where I go 13 miles and I'm by myself and I'm just running. Right. Yeah, I have music, but that's a lot of freaking time to just think about things.
Yeah.
So a lot of my lines and a lot of my thoughts and thinking processes happen over runs where I'm just like, yep, this is something I do.
Yeah.
Why do I do it now? I have an hour to think about it because I am doing nothing other than moving my body.
Yeah.
great.
My God, yo, dude, you're speaking my language because that's exactly how it is. Like cause I go bike riding sometimes too, right? So I'll go
That's
bike
another one. Yeah.
riding, or I'm listening to music, but then a thought comes to mind. I'll pause the track and then I'll start talking to myself about what the fuck I'm thinking about, and then it'll be a whole conversation. So since I have these earbuds, I play it off like I'm having a conversation with someone on the phone, but I'm really not. I'm just talking gibberish to myself. I'm like, oh wait, let me write this shit down. Hold on, let me write this
Yeah, I
down.
either write it down or record it on the spot.
But when I'm bike riding, I do that a lot, and sometimes I feel like I gotta be careful because I'll forget that I'm bike riding, and then I almost get hit by a car or something. I was like, oh shit, whoops, like, oh my God. So I know everything you just said. I know exactly what you're saying because that's me too. Like I could be walking around the block and I'll have a whole conversation with myself. It's oh my God, wow.
Hmm.
Woo! Okay, hold up, because I have to compose myself. 'Cause I'm getting very excited right now because I'm learning a lot, and that is wow. Oh man. So, do you consider yourself a poet, or do you consider yourself a spoken word artist?
It's all the same thing. Like, no,
Wait.
it's not. It's
Okay.
not, but like, it's. I understand how it's not interchangeable, but it depends. I'm a poet. I just poet, you know?
Right.
That's like I'm a poet, sure, but if they want to I put spoken word poet on my bio. You know,
Okay.
like that's what I put, spoken word poet, because it just makes it's hard to explain it to people who are not poets what
Right.
I am. So that's why I put spoken word poet, so they understand. Oh yeah, he's a poet, but he does this for performance a lot of the times. That's what we're getting out of it. We're not getting a
Mm.
poet who does it for workshops and writes, you know, haikus all day. No, we're getting a poet who does the performance aspect. Because I don't want to put slam poet either, because that's what a lot of people think too. I'm like, yeah, but like slam poet is like for poetry slam. So like, yeah, I'm a slam poet because I do slam, but like that's not all I do. Like not all my
Got
poems are
you.
slam poems. So it's just like I don't even know. Like
No,
it's
no,
just
no. There's no right or wrong answer in my opinion. I think that's. I
yeah.
love how you describe that, and it makes so much sense. Because there's so many types of poetry, and I'm still trying to learn, right? Because Allen Ginsberg, for example, a lot of things he wrote wasn't in stanzas. There was just words and paragraphs, and I'm just like, yo, but this guy was saying a lot of deep stuff, right? But then there's the sonnets, there's the haikus, and then you're talking about spoken word and slam. So, okay, because I think this is something I don't know if this is a dumb question or not. I don't know. I'll probably find out when you with your answer. Um, spoken word slam. Can you describe what is the difference between like what is slam? Is this because slam to me? I'm thinking, oh, you're slamming somebody or you're dissing somebody, like rapping
No,
kind of.
slam poetry is when you're in a poetry slam, which is a competition for poets to perform pieces on stage. You're given 3 minutes. Sometimes you're given a grace period, most times you're not. 3 minutes to perform against however many poets you want to go against, depends on the slam. No props are allowed to be used. No music. You only can use things on your own body and your own words to create the performance. That's it. That's what a poetry slam is. Usually at least
Wow.
2 rounds, sometimes 3 rounds. And you go, you perform, you slam, you compete, you get graded or like judged by usually 5 judges in the audience. Top score gets dropped, bottom score gets dropped. They add the middle three, 0.0, between 10.0, and you get a score.
So
Highest
it's like
score.
it's like the Olympics kind of.
Sure. Yeah, it's a competition. And it's been going on for there's a whole history about it. We don't have enough time
Yeah.
here to do it, but there's a whole history behind slam, and that's what slam is. Okay, so if you perform ever in a
Mm.
slam, you're a slam poet. It's kind of like, oh yeah, if you write a poem, you're a poet. It's easy as that. Um,
Wow. Okay.
spoken word is just another way to go about it because now it's like I'm not a slam. poet, but I'm not writing poetry for the page. I'm writing poetry for the stage. So that I don't know exactly the history behind where the term spoken word came from, but I don't know. It's just same thing. You're just speaking words. Like that's
Right. No,
it.
no, no, right.
You know?
But okay, but is when you say spoken word though, do you is it the same as, let's say, if I'm reciting a poem, like like for example, if let's say I'm reading off a piece of paper, but I still do the performance as if I have that paper as a guide. I mean, are you still considered spoken? Is that considered spoken word? Are you
It can be.
reciting?
Honestly, it's up to it's like user. It's up to the user, up to the person who's performing. Whatever you want to deem yourself, deem it. Like
No, no, 'cause
that's
that's why I
as
asked, because
as
I
flexible as that.
really, yeah, because I'm still trying to understand these terminologies that you're talking about. Like I said, like the spoken word, and then there's a poet. Like that's why I always ask, because it's interesting and confusing, and I don't want to say it's complex. It's more like people make it complex when it shouldn't be. I guess, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
because like spoken word originally came from the movements, basically. Okay,
Okay.
a lot of influence. I mean, so let's say poetry in general, like slam poetry, performance poetry, spoken word. That came from the Black Arts era. You know,
Okay.
it came from the beatniks who like
Mm.
the meter with the snaps, and they had the bongos and the cool hats.
Ah, okay.
Um,
Got you.
but also like the Black Arts movements, whether it's like New York City, Chicago. Chicago was a big one. All these other places, and they used it for political speech. You know, like political
Mm.
speech, powerful movements to really go against it. I mean, even Latinos have it. I mean, there's a poet who did it during the farm, like this, like civil rights movement. You know, civil rights movement was big time for poets. But also, let's say the farm workers union, Cesar Chavez, Gloria, what you call it, Dolores Huerta, and all these other, you know,
Right.
big movement people. But there was also Randolfo Corky Gonzalez. That's what I
Okay.
was thinking. I don't know. He's Mexican American boxer, poet, political organizer, activist. He was known for his like his poem, like his
Wow.
big poem that he did. Yo soy Joaquin. Joaquin. That was the name. Yo
Okay.
soy Joaquin. That was the poem. It was amazing, and he used it to for activism. Poetry has been used for activism. That's where
Yeah.
spoken word comes from. That's where slam comes from. That's where performance
Wow.
comes from. It comes from activism. So that's why when we're in a time where activism needs to take place, that poets are the ones who are kind of in the forefront and should be talking about these matters
I definitely
first,
agree.
you know, because that's where it starts on the
Wow.
streets, within the music, within the poets, within the artists. That's where things start moving. And then
Wow.
it influences everybody. You
Wow.
know, people
I
don't think the arts is big, but we all watch Netflix.
mm-hmm.
We all watched the movies growing up.
Yeah, dude,
We
there's
all hear
movies.
music.
There's a movie with Tyler Perry that it was like poetically. It's a poem based. It's based on a book. I forgot the name of the book, but he did a movie based on that poetry book, and it's like a whole thing. It's so good. I mean, I like it. I know people who don't like the movie, but I love the movie. I think it was good. Janet Jackson's in that movie, if I'm not mistaken. Um, but poetry, I think, is a very underrated tool that can help us make change, make a difference, and to provide a source of action, like to make people think. Because I could have a conversation with you about American culture, right? But if we did it in a poetic format where it's more like, okay, no, but we're sending a message in a different way, in an authentic way, like, oh no, but we're doing it as a performance, but we're also doing this performance as a way to express concerns, like, hey, look, we have a voice and let's use it, right? And I think that's important, right? Because one thing I said at the open mic was we need to be loud. We have a voice. We have to be loud, especially with everything that's going on right now. We need to be loud. Being loud poetically will make the biggest difference. And I think when we touch on things that a lot of people don't want to talk about, and I was having this conversation with my wife about, even like in church, there's stuff that churches don't talk about anymore, or they just don't touch on. But and I can have that conversation or preach to you about whatever, but if I did it in a poetic way, that's gives, I feel like the perspective is different in a way, like, oh, I'll make people think. And I think poetry does that, and I think that's important. Which leads into my next question, because I've had this conversation with many people actually. Do you think poetry is dead, or do you think it needs a redirection? What do you think? In your
No,
honest opinion.
poetry has never died.
Amen.
It ebbs and flows, but it's never died. There's no need for a resurrection or a renaissance of any sort because it's never stopped.
Ooh.
Yeah, it's definitely ebbed and flow. Definitely in the 2000s where it just wasn't as big, maybe. But this stuff is happening.
Yeah.
These things are happening, and there's poetry going on everywhere all the time. I mean, the Nuyorican just celebrated 50 years.
Yeah.
They're the ones who invented snapping after a poet goes on the stage.
Yeah.
Because in a one-bedroom apartment where Miguel Agarin started the Nuyorican Poets Cafe, they got called. The cops got called on them because they clapped for the poets. So they started snapping so they wouldn't get kicked out. A lot of people think it's from the beatniks to keep the beat.
Yes.
But that was during the poem, not after. You know? That's where it came from. And it's definitely something that's just, it's been going, especially in the Black and brown communities.
Yes.
Poetry has very much been alive. It's very much been used. I mean, people think, oh, this is rap, this is this is that. No, poetry has still existed in those communities. I've met many elders over these years now, even out here, many elders who are poets, who have been poets since they were 15 years old, and now they're 70 years old, still coming up and spitting on these mics.
Wow.
Again, it's been used for social movements. It's been used for political movements.
Right.
These poets exist. Again, I'm talking about the time of Cesar Chavez. Yeah, that's like, MLK, Cesar Chavez. Even in the 90s where a lot of things are going on, it was a big, heavy time. That's where spoken word, the term got coined, was during the 90s. These people are still alive.
Wow.
These events did not happen that long ago.
Wow.
30 years ago. So these poets are still going. These people are still saying the words that need to be said. It's just maybe in the mainstream media, poetry hasn't been big. I mean, Def Poetry Jam, like that was a whole big thing. The early 2000s show.
Yeah.
That went on for 6 seasons.
You just brought back a memory. Wow. You said Def Chat. Wow. Bro.
Yeah, Def Poetry. Like, let's talk about button poetry. Bringing poetry to the next level. They started in the early 2010s.
Yeah, I remember button poetry. Yeah,
and they're still. They are the biggest like publishing house probably for poetry right now.
Wow,
like they're huge. They're huge. They focus only on poetry, and any of their people who go on their platform get millions of followers. And that's in just this last decade. Now in this decade, I got into it through an online open mic in the middle of Iowa.
Wow.
Literally in about an hour, I'm about to go and host an online open mic for the Nuyorican Poets Cafe.
Wow.
And I already have a list of 20 packed, and also like 10, 15 more people who just bought tickets just to watch.
Wow.
On a Zoom room.
Bro.
3 years after the pandemic started.
Wow. That's an honor, man. Wow.
It's just like this is still happening. I remember when these rooms used to have 50 people in them at all times. Wow. Sorry, we only got 30 people coming to the room now. Like, this stuff is not dying.
Amen.
It's been existent. It still happens. It's just how it's perceived by media, the masses, the people is different than we want to say because it's not as easily marketable or sellable for businesses due to the nature of it sometimes.
Yeah.
Music, you can get around with it because it's a bop. You can hide phrases.
Right.
Poetry is about the change. It's about the feeling. It's about social reform.
Wow.
Not big companies are not always willing to take that kind of gamble.
Wow. No, thank you for that. Because I definitely agree with you on that. Because we've had conversations in the past, like on this platform, about is poetry dead, or does it seem like it's dead because we don't hear about it enough, right? But then there's this other argument that, again, like you just made a whole valid point right there because it makes so much sense. And then there's this other aspect of it where at times people felt like it's not that it's dead, and it's not that it's lost, rather it needs a redirection, right? That's another argument that exists as well. So wow, so I'm just like, again, I'm learning so much from you, brother, and like, wow, I'm like, oh my god, this is such an amazing conversation. Thank you so much for it. So we are reaching towards the end, but I do want to say thank you, Matthew, for I've learned so much from you tonight. It's not even funny. It's like, wow. And I always ask everybody this question. I'm gonna ask you the same question. In your eyes, in your opinion, and stuff like that. Once we're not in this life anymore. Because eventually we're gonna die. We're gonna move forward with our lives. Die or whatever.
Bro, poets live forever.
Wait, say it again. And what?
Poets live forever. What are you talking about?
Yeah, no, but I mean, like, as far as physically. So physically, when we're not here anymore, when people hear your name, what would you like them to remember you by, and what impact would you like to leave behind?
I would have liked to leave behind. I'd like to leave behind creations I can be proud of, and my future children, future family can also be proud of. Whether that's in poetry or not, I want to leave something for this world to exist. I want to leave the generations with the stories I've been given.
Wow.
I come from parents who, even though they're not technically classified as refugees, they're refugees. They escaped a war, a civil war, to come to the U.S.
Right.
They're refugee parents. I want to keep on telling those stories, the stories of my ancestors, the stories of my grandmother, how she fought to get here, how my parents fought to get here, how I got here.
Wow.
A lot of people don't have that luxury. A lot of it was lost. Natives were killed off by the Spanish, and a lot of, Africans were killed during the slave trade and during
Wow.
slavery. History's been lost for a lot of
Mm.
people of color. And if I can gather the history that we do have so far and pass that on so they at least have something to look back on, that's going to be all the much more power to the future generations.
Wow. Wow. Oh my god. See, my camera's messed up, so you can't like see me, but like I'm like blushing right now, cause that's how I feel about life too. I'll be honest with you, I don't know. I mean, I'm Puerto Rican and everything, but I don't know too much about my background. I'll be honest with you. But like to want to know what it is, to want to find out, so I can understand what my roots are, to understand where my parents came from and stuff like that. I think that's very important. And it's like you said, I think history has been lost for so long. And see, because my parents grew up at a time where there was things that were not talked about. I grew up at a time where things were becoming like an awareness, but in Hispanic culture we weren't allowed to talk about it. We were kind of told to shush. And it wasn't until I got older and I came into this poetry community on Instagram is when I started to really be more open about myself. But even though that was great and all, but my whole thing is I want to hear your story, right? That's why I created this platform. I created this podcast. I started doing more in-person open mics. It's like the first one we were a part of. And, you get to be a part of that now. We look back like, yeah, I remember I went to the first one kind of thing. Same thing with, I hear stories like the New York Rican Cafe and Button Poetry. Like, I love stories like that because it starts somewhere, but it became something more bigger than what it is. And I think that's important. Even in Hispanic culture, that's very important to me because I don't know a lot. And it's like there's stuff that schools do not teach. There's things that nobody wants to touch on, but if we could break those barriers and break that glass ceiling and to just have the conversation that you and I are having right now, to me, that's the most fucking important thing in the world to me. Because if I die, I want people to remember the fact that, hey, someone like Matthew, someone like me, someone like Angela, someone like, and such, someone like Robert Kazi, for example, another guy who's comes from a generation, you don't have to be my father pretty much, but he's so open with himself, and you don't see people from his
Mhm.
generation to talk to him to be open like that the way he is. You never see that. And
Yeah,
it's
that's
like
that's what I love
we
about
need
her.
that, and we need that. We need more people like that because we learn from them, but we learn from each other. Like I'm just learning so much about like from you today, and that already is an honor and a privilege, and I'll never forget that. So thank you for just being real, being raw. Thank you for just being your authentic self, man. Because everything you said, that struggle is real, man. That struggle is real, and we just like it's important, so Matthew, thank you so much for just doing this episode with me. Hopefully one of these days we could do a part two because I would love to hear more about that because that's another conversation in itself, and that's like very powerful to me. So thank you so much, guys. Thank you for listening, and stay tuned for the episode number 6.